Hi and welcome to this video in the MRDCL Understanding Concept series, and in this video we're going to be looking at applying different types of weighting in MRDCL. So we're going to cover what I might say is the 4 different types of weighting that you encounter. I'm going to put the first of them to one side because they're not talking about target weighting, which is what most of this video is about. There are times when you want to weight a table by a quantity so that the table is no longer, if you like, in terms of people, it's in terms of money spent, cans of drink bought, whatever it might be, and we often call that a volumetric. We are going to cover that briefly, but it's sort of separate from the rest of the video, which is going to look at target weighting, rim weighting, and applying factor weighting. So they're the 3 types of weighting, other types of weighting we're going to cover in this video. Applying a factor that's already in the data, working out using target weights to calculate factors that we want to apply, and using rim weights where the factors are also calculated and applied to our tables. So let's start looking at our data very quickly first of all. So we have a data file here with a small number of records, just 20 records, and you can see here they've got some demographics at the front here and some values in here. If we look at the script that goes with this, just to bring this to life, you can see there's gender in field 5, age in 6. Question 1 is a rating here from 1 to 5, or 5 responses from 1 to 5. Question 2 is a distance traveled in 8 to 10. And finally, we have a weighting factor that's present in the data in 11 to 14. So let's look at that in the data now. So the serial number of the first 4 columns. There's the gender in the 5th column, 1s and 2s. Here's the age groups in the 6th field, which are 1, 2, and 3. Then we have a value. Let's carry on now looking at 8 to 10 is a distance traveled. So looking at that in the data, we can see here, if we go to the 8th field, we have a respondent here with 20. The one below is 10. The one below is 5, and so on. And we've also got an example here of the weight, the factor that needs to be applied to each respondent being present in the data. Now that's not very common, but sometimes you can be supplied with data with the factors that you want to apply being within the data file themselves. So this means that we want to weight record number 1 by 1.20, the second record by 0.80, and so on. Whereas the other examples I'm going to show you will be using calculations to targets or rims that we specified. So let's look at the tables we get first of all. Let's go down to the tables in this script. So the first tables here in the main body of tables, table 1 is just gender by age, so that's just totally unweighted data. The second table is Q1 by a banner which has gender and age side by side. There you can see it above. Table 3 shows a distribution of all of those values for the distance travelled in question 2 in field 8 to 10 by a banner with them applied in ascending order. And then we have our first example of weighting, and this is the one that I said is slightly separate from the rest, where we're going to apply volumetric. So table 4 is applying the distance travelled to a table of gender by age, and it is important to remember to turn that back off again with select WQ1 so that the table is unweighted from there on. If we look at the tables that produces, you can see we've got table 1 here, which has 20 people in it. There's our 3 age groups, 6, 8 and 6, 9, 11 when it comes to the females. Table 2 shows question 1 by the banner of gender and age. And you may remember table 3 was the distance travelled with the values in ascending order. So we got 0, 4, 5, 7, 8, 10 and so on. And then table 4 was the volumetric table where we're weighting the number of people in the table by the distance they travel. So this is no longer 367 people, it's 367 miles or kilometers, whatever the unit is. And that you could see there with 20 people on averaging 18.4 actually is where that 367 comes from. So this is weighted by a volumetric by the distance traveled in the last week. For the rest of the video now, we're going to be looking at producing using either targets or factors. Now you saw in the data there was a factor available. So this is the fifth table where the data is weighted by a factor. So you can see here that the males have gone to 8 people now, whereas they were originally 9 in the unweighted table. So if we go back up to the unweighted, it's 9 males and 11 females. But when we apply the factors at table 5, we now get 8 and 12. And that's the field that if we go back to our data, you can see there's the figure of 1.2 being applied to the first record, 0.8 to the second. So that's just applying a factor that's in the data itself. Now, the rest of the video, we're going to be looking at using techniques that calculate the weights for us, where we just give it the targets and MRDCL effectively goes off and does all the work for us. So let's look at how we do that. And here we see the tables that you have to calculate to do target weighting. Now we've got 2 examples in here. We've got both weighting to figures that you want to weight up to. So you might use figures if you wanted to weight up to the population of a country, for example. But sometimes you just want to adjust the percentages. So there's a slightly different calculation needed, or a different calculation needed, if you want to weight up to percentages, which in fact is probably the more common thing, where you want to say, for example, that your males 16 to 34 represent 15% of your weighted data. So let's have a look at what we need to do. So the first table is called actual, and that's got not print total row, not print total column, and it's just going to get the actual number of gender by age people in the sample, because when you do target weighting, you will always be weighting either to one variable or 2 variables. You will always want to have interlocking cells. So rim weighting will work if you want to weight to genders to add up to 100% and age to add up to 100%, for example. But if you have the interlocking cells of each gender within each age group, this will be the methodology that you will use. So we've got a table actual. We've got a target figure table, which is just an empty table. So we're not printing the total rows or the columns. We're not even incrementing that. And we don't want percentages. So that's just an empty table. And that's what we'll be using to implement our targets in a little while. And then we've got FactFig, which is going to be used to work out the factors. Again, not doing any incrementation here. The only format option you can see additional there is DPT1, so that we can see the factors that it produces to 1 decimal place. And then separately, we've got FactPC, so that we can put in percentages in case you want to weight to percentages rather than figures. And we've got TargPC, so we can calculate the factors where that's needed. And I've got another table here which is just star comma, which gives me the sample size which we will need if we're using percentages. So let's scroll on now to the manip part and look at what we have to do to calculate our figures. So if we want to do target weighting to figures, we're going to say that the table target figures is from rows 1 to $, that's the first row to the last row, column 1 to $, first column to the last column, and these are the targets, 5, 4, 3. So for the males, for the first age group, I want 5, then 4, then 3, and for the females, I want 2, 2, and 4. And then to calculate the factors in my FactFig table, I'm going to divide the target figures in here by the actual figures. So it will then calculate cell by cell the factors that I want. So let's look at what that's done in my tables now. Go back to my tables. And you might want to hide these when you come to do this for real, but there you can see my actual figures, 333, 353. There are the targets that I just showed you, but you can see now it's calculated the factors that it needs. So to get The males for the fact figures, here it needs a weight of 1.7, so to get from 3 actual males to 5 males, it's showing a figure of 1.7. More accurately, that would be 1.6666, but I've rounded this to 1 decimal place, and so on, of course. And there's no weighting here, or weight of 1 here, because we wanted 3 and we've got 3 in there, and the females have calculated some other figures. So that's what's going on behind the scenes to calculate that for us. If it's percentages, it's slightly more complicated. We'd put the percentages in the TARG PC table. So we've got 20%, 10%, 15%, 30, 15, and 10. And that adds to 100%, obviously. Then we need that table that had the sample size in it. And I'm defining a variable called sample that's coming from just that one cell of the sample table. And then to get the weighting factors that we need to apply, we use the same arithmetic to divide the percentages by the actual, but for that to work we need to multiply it by that variable, the sample, the actual sample, which is 20 records here, and divide it by 100% so that the factors are applied. And that's just a simple arithmetic fact, the way you need to have to do that. Again, let's go back to our tables here. So we can now see the factors for the percentages are 1.3, 0.7, 1.0, 2.06 and 7, and there's our targets of 20, 10 and 15. So we've got some different factors coming out this time. So if we look at our females, we wanted them to be 30% of the sample. In the original data they were only 15%, so they've got a weight of 2.0 to achieve that. And there's our sample table with 20 people in it, so it can do all of that arithmetic. Now to apply that weighting, we'll come back down here, and you can see that what I've done here is to apply the weighting. So in the case of when we were applying the factor just now, we just had select WR $factor because that was within the data, but this time I'm defining a variable called gender age, which is gender dot by dot age, and I'm defining the weight as being from that variable, picking up the figures from the table factfig. So this is all explained in an introductory video in more detail how to do this, but hopefully if you've seen that, this will make absolutely perfectly good sense. And then I apply that weighting of select WR weight, and I produce a table of gender by age and Q1 by the banner. And then on tables 8 and 9 I do the same thing again, except I pick up the weights from FactPC, apply it, and again I can now produce those two tables. So let's look at tables 6, 7, 8 and 9. 6 and 7 were the ones with the first weighting, and 8 and 9 were the seconds. So let's go down to table 6. And now you can see that the data's weighted. Because it's weighted, we've got that unweighted row. You can see the original unweighted base, the weighted base, and you can see in this table I'm getting the figures I wanted. You may remember the targets were 5, 4, 3, 2, 2 and 4, so that all looks fine. There it is to apply now to the table for question 1 by the banner. And now we've got the percentages, and you can see now we've got 45% male, 55% female, which is what the target was there. And if you add up the figures for the ages, you would get the same calculation, so you can check that your weighting has worked correctly. So finally we come to rim weighting, which is where you just specify targets for the rims that you want. So here it's a little bit different, the approach. So here we've defined a table called gender star, so that's just going to have an empty table, not increment, as you can see there, where it can use the gender variable to calculate the rims. Rim 2 is my age. My table fact rim is gender by age. Now I want to apply the factors that I want. So the factors that I want for male, I want it to add to 100%, and I want 50% male, 50% female. Rim 2, I want it to add to 100%, 40% male, 30%, 30%. Now one little tip here, always make sure your figures add up correctly. So these, obviously 50 plus 50 does equal 100%, but I have seen people use rims where they've been rounded, and so actually the figures here add to perhaps 99.9%. Your target weighting will not work correctly if you don't get it add up correctly, because it will never be able to quite reach the rims that you're giving it, because that you're giving it an impossible solution, if you like, and the result will be incorrect. So always make sure these figures, even with their rounded figures, add up exactly to the figures you're working with, and if you need another decimal place, by all means use that. My table FAC rim uses the function %rim, and this is an important thing here. It's got U here. Now U means weight it back to the original base. So whatever figures you get, weight it back to the original base. In this case it was 20, so it's going to scale it back to 20. But if I wanted to scale that to some other figure, I could put a variable in there, or I can just type in the number 3000, for example, and it would weight it back to 3000 weighted respondents. Then I put the arguments in for this function. So the first one is my actual table. Then I want rim, and I want rim2. And to pick that up the other side, again, we go through the same procedure really as before. We just define a variable, use gender, age again, pick it up from FACRIM and apply it. And if we look at our tables 10 and 11 now, which are a little bit further down, we should be able to see that we're getting males as 50-50 here, and the age groups in the proportions that we wanted of 8, 6 and 6. So that appears to work, and here again we've got the table coming out for question 1 by that banner. So I hope this video has been useful to you. It's explained some of the different ways that you can weight data, both quantity or volumetric type weighting, applying weighting where the factors within the data, applying target weighting both to figures or percentages, and to rim weighting as well, where you have where you're just weighting to 100% typically for independent variables. If you want to weight to more than variables than 2 for both target or rim weighting, you will need to explode that into a two-dimensional table. When it comes to target weighting, for rim weighting, you can just add more variables to the list as shown in the help. So I hope that's been helpful to you. Thank you.